New York City, November 1895. A crisp morning finds Fifth Avenue thronged with onlookers craning for a glimpse of a wedding like no other. Inside St. Thomas Church, beneath Gothic arches and flickering gaslight, an American heiress stands veiled in satin and lace. She is Consuelo Vanderbilt, shy, beautiful, and worth the modern equivalent of some $4 billion. In moments, she will become the Duchess of Marlborough, wife to one of Britain's loftiest aristocrats. But this is no fairy tale. The young bride has spent her wedding morning sobbing alone behind locked doors, guarded by a footman to prevent any last-minute escape. Outside, society pages hail the transatlantic union of wealth and title as a triumph. Inside, tears stain Consuelo's bridal veil as she is escorted down the aisle. The crowd gasps at the splendor. They cannot see the heartbreak. This marriage, magnificently public and painfully personal, is one chapter in a larger saga. The era when America's new money dynasties bought their way into Europe's old aristocracy. It was the late 19th century, the twilight of the Victorian Age and the dawn of the Gilded Age. On one side of the Atlantic, the British nobility presided over grand ancestral estates, but quietly teetered on the brink of ruin. Generations of dukes and earls had lived off land revenues, yet now their fortunes were dwindling. A worldwide agricultural depression struck. Cheap grain flooded in from the United States prairies, undercutting English harvests. Rents fell, debts rose. Stately homes grew cold and damp for want of costly upkeep. Proud lords, forbidden by class convention to engage in anything so common as business or labor, found themselves land-rich but cash-poor. By the late 19th century, Britain's aristocracy was down on its luck. Its once unassailable wealth now eclipsed by a new elite across the ocean. Meanwhile, in the United States, a new aristocracy of money was rising. Titans of railroads, steel, oil, and finance, names like Vanderbilt, Astor, Carnegie, and Rockefeller, amassed unprecedented fortunes in the post-Civil War boom. Their wives and daughters draped themselves in Paris gowns and diamonds, inhabiting marble palaces in New York and Newport. Yet for all their riches, these nouveau riche families craved respectability to match their money. American society in the Gilded Age was ruled by old money, Knickerbocker families who traced lineages to colonial times. They snubbed the upstarts, dismissing even multimillionaires as uncouth parvenus if their wealth was freshly minted. The young heiresses of these self-made clans could throw lavish balls and build French chateaux on Fifth Avenue. But what they could not purchase at home was pedigree. Across the Atlantic lay a solution: marriage, a transaction in which one side held what the other lacked. In the drawing rooms of London and the great country houses of England, there were blue-blooded bachelors with ancient titles and splendid coats of arms. Dukes, marquises, earls, and viscounts, whose families had prestige stretching back centuries. What many of them did not have, however, was money for the modern age. The mutual interests of these two groups were glaringly obvious. As one observer quipped, by marrying a rich Miss Vanderbilt or Miss Astor, a cash-strapped lord could ensure not just the survival of his family's land and name, but also a life enhanced by easy access to money. The Americans hungered for aristocratic titles. The aristocrats hungered for American cash. A bargain waited to be struck: dollars for dukes. And so, beginning in the 1870s and swelling to a flood by the 1890s, scores of young American heiresses voyaged to Europe in search of noble husbands. These women came to be known as dollar princesses, a not always flattering label for the daughters of American tycoons who traded wealth for prestige by wedding into titled European families. According to one count, between the Gilded Age and the First World War, 454 American heiresses married members of Europe's aristocracy. They injected the staggering equivalent of about £1 billion into the moribund British economy. At one point, the Library of Congress noted, American brides could be found in over a third of all British House of Lords families. An extraordinary transfusion of New World money into Old World bloodlines. Early pioneers of this trend appeared as soon as the 1870s. In 1874, a vivacious Brooklyn-born socialite named Jennie Jerome astonished British high society by capturing the heart of Lord Randolph Churchill, son of the 7th Duke of Marlborough. Legend has it they met at a sailing regatta on the Isle of Wight, and after only 3 days, announced their intent to marry. The prospect horrified Lord Randolph's aristocratic parents. Who was this American girl with no title? Jennie's father, Leonard Jerome, was a flamboyant Wall Street speculator known as the King of the Bulls and Bears. Her mother was rumored falsely to have a dab of Iroquois Native American ancestry, all of which fed British snobbery. The Churchill family sneered that Leonard Jerome drove a team of 6 or 8 horses through the streets of New York as an indication of what the man is. In their eyes, no matter how wealthy, the Jeromes were not their kind of people. But the young lovers had a powerful ally. Edward, the Prince of Wales, future King Edward VII, a friend of Jennie's who liked and admired her. More persuasively, they had money on their side. Lord Randolph was a younger son with scant income. Sustaining a Churchill lifestyle required outside funds. Leonard Jerome thus sweetened the deal with a dowry of £50,000, an astronomical sum in 1874, worth around $6.7 million today, plus an annual allowance of £1,000 to his daughter. This cold financial logic overcame the aristocrats' objections. With the prince's endorsement and the Jerome's cash, the Duke and Duchess of Marlborough reluctantly blessed the match. The wedding took place in Paris, and Jennie Jerome became Lady Randolph Churchill, one of the first American-born women to storm Britain's high society. Lady Churchill's story would become legendary. Though her marriage was turbulent, both she and Lord Randolph pursued extramarital affairs. Jennie was even rumored to have caught the eye of the Prince of Wales himself. She swiftly proved her worth in British society. Clever, stylish, and charismatic, Jennie became a celebrated political hostess and confidant. In 1875, just 7 months after the wedding, she gave birth to a son, Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill. Yes, the Winston Churchill, future Prime Minister of Britain, was half American by blood. The astounded British public realized that for all their prejudices, an American woman had given them one of their great leaders. Jennie Jerome personified a new type of transatlantic aristocrat, described by contemporaries as bright, intelligent, and a bit headstrong, the very qualities that endeared her to Britain's then Prince of Wales. By 1903, Lady Randolph could write proudly that the old prejudices against American women in Europe had largely vanished. American women are now appreciated as they deserve, she asserted. Her success story blazed a trail, and many would follow in her footsteps. Throughout the late 1870s and 1880s, a trickle of dollar princess marriages became a deluge. Another early case was Consuelo Vanderbilt, the daughter of a Cuban-American sugar planter who in 1876 married the Viscount Mandeville, heir to the Duke of Manchester. She would later inspire Edith Wharton's novel The Buccaneers, which fictionalized the phenomenon. In 1878, Mary Minnie Stevens, whose father, Perrin Stevens, was a wealthy New York hotelier, wed Sir Arthur Paget, a British general and aristocrat. Lady Paget, as Minnie became, subsequently emerged as a queen bee of London society, often acting as a social broker for other American hopefuls. By the 1890s, the transatlantic marriage market was in full swing, almost an institution unto itself. Every summer during the London season, throngs of American debutantes, chaperoned by ambitious mothers, descended upon ballrooms and country house parties, hoping to catch the eye of titled gentlemen. It became a well-oiled process. Those with family connections used them. Others paid intermediaries. In fact, introductions to eligible aristocrats became something of a commodity. As one historian notes, An American girl's ultimate aspiration was to be presented at the British royal court, a ritual that opened many social doors. Only a lady who had herself been presented could sponsor a debutante, so some cash-strapped noblewomen quietly accepted payments to present rich American girls at court. A cottage industry of matchmaking blossomed, with figures like Minnie Stevens Paget and others guiding the newcomers. Newspapers breathlessly chronicled each transatlantic engagement, feeding a popular fascination with these Yankee invasions of high society. There was even a published guidebook to this peculiar marriage market, titled Americans, a yearly directory that cataloged which American heiresses had married European nobles, and helpfully listed the remaining unmarried lords, their titles, and their reputed fortunes. It was essentially a catalog of aristocratic bachelors, complete with price tags. Ambitious American mothers could, and did, thumb through its pages like a shopping list of suitors. There were few secrets in its blunt listings. A destitute duke or indebted earl was laid bare for all to see. As one contemporary journalist wryly noted, there was no danger of the supply of titles running short, so long as dollars kept flowing. The whole affair had a whiff of businesslike opportunism beneath the silk and champagne. Indeed, to many observers, these marriages resembled cold contracts more than romantic unions. And often, that's exactly what they were. The year 1895 marked the zenith of the dollar princess phenomenon. In that single year, no fewer than 9 American heiresses married European nobles. High society on both sides of the ocean buzzed with transatlantic matchups. Among them was the union of Mary Leiter, daughter of a Chicago department store millionaire, to Lord George Curzon, a rising British politician who would soon become Viceroy of India. Another was the most fabled catch of all, Consuelo Vanderbilt, who at 18 was coerced by her parents into marrying Charles Spencer Churchill, the 9th Duke of Marlborough. Consuelo's marriage, more than any other, has come to symbolize the entire era's trade of money for status. An advantageous but loveless alliance sealed under the towering dome of St. Thomas Church amid both grandeur and misery. Consuelo Vanderbilt's story reads like drama scripted for the stage, yet it is painfully real. She was American royalty, the favorite daughter of William Kissam Vanderbilt, a railroad and shipping magnate, and his formidable wife, Alva Vanderbilt. Alva was determined to shove the Vanderbilts into the highest ranks of society, both in America and abroad. Having muscled her way into New York's elite by building ostentatious mansions and throwing spectacular balls, Alva set her sights even higher, an English duke for her daughter. Consuelo, dark-eyed and demure, had other ideas. She was secretly in love with an American suitor, Winthrop Rutherford, but Alva Vanderbilt was not a woman to be denied. She took Consuelo to Europe to parade her before aristocratic prospects, and upon identifying Marlborough as the prime candidate, she sprang a trap. Learning that Consuelo might elope with her American sweetheart, Alva locked her in her room and threatened to disown her unless she agreed to the Duke's proposal. Under immense pressure, the dutiful daughter capitulated. In Alva's iron view, no mere romantic love could equal the victory of seating a Vanderbilt in Blenheim Palace, the Marlborough's splendid ancestral home. So it came to pass that on November 6, 1895, Consuelo Vanderbilt walked down the aisle to marry the Duke. She was radiant in pearls and Brussels lace, yet behind her veil, she was weeping. I spent the morning of my wedding day in tears and alone. No one came near me, Consuelo later revealed, recalling how even her own mother avoided her that day. So reluctant was the bride that the ceremony started nearly half an hour late, the guests murmuring in confusion, because Consuelo's swollen, red eyes had to be iced to reduce the evidence of her sobbing. Outside, crowds cheered the new Duchess of Marlborough. Inside, Consuelo felt like a lamb led to slaughter. If the personal cost to Consuelo was hidden, the financial terms of the marriage were anything but. The alliance between Vanderbilt and Marlborough was essentially a business merger, hammered out in dollars and cents. The Duke received a dowry of $2.5 million in Vanderbilt Railroad stock, an infusion equivalent to roughly $80 million today, plus an annual stipend of $100,000, about $3 million today, to maintain the ducal household. These extraordinary sums, one of the largest dowries ever seen, were explicitly intended to save Blenheim Palace, the Marlborough family seat, from financial ruin. The Duke of Marlborough, Charles' Sonny Spencer Churchill, made little effort to pretend otherwise. On their honeymoon, he reportedly told his new bride with chilling candor that he had married her only because I felt obliged to save Blenheim, his ancestral home. He had even broken off a long-standing romantic attachment to an Englishwoman he loved in order to secure Consuelo's fortune. In essence, Consuelo's father had bought the dukedom for his daughter, and the Duke had sold it to preserve his estate. Once installed as Duchess in England, Consuelo Vanderbilt faced the stark reality behind the glittering title. Blenheim Palace was magnificent, a Baroque masterpiece built on sprawling grounds, but life there was hardly comfortable for a 19th-century American used to modern luxuries. The drafty corridors and endless rooms were dark, dingy, and terribly cold. Consuelo discovered that even taking a hot bath was an ordeal in an age before indoor plumbing was common in Britain. A servant had to haul 5 heavy jugs of hot water up from a distant kitchen just to fill a tub. Accustomed to the steamy bathrooms and central heating of her father's mansions, the young Duchess shivered under ancestral roofs that lacked such conveniences. She spent her first months at Blenheim in a dreary north-facing suite while her own quarters were being redecorated, enduring an existence she described as ugly and cheerless, devoid of the comforts my own home had provided. Her husband, meanwhile, busied himself restoring Blenheim's grandeur, funded entirely by Consuelo's dowry, and reportedly resumed an affair with his former lover almost immediately. Consuelo's duties were to produce heirs. She gave birth to 2 sons, an heir and a spare, and to uphold the Marlborough name in society. She did so diligently, becoming a popular and poised figure in Britain's social whirl, but her private unhappiness was profound. "How I learned to dread and hate those dinners," she later wrote of the stifling formality of her life with the Duke. By 1906, the Marlboroughs had separated in all but name. By 1921, they divorced, ending the 25-year charade of a marriage. In the words of historian Nancy Unger, "It was a horrible marriage. She was so miserable, and it didn't last." Consuelo Vanderbilt had gained one of the most coveted titles on earth, but at the price of her freedom and happiness. Not all of the Dollar Princess unions were as bleak as Consuelo's. A few even blossomed into genuine love matches. Mary Leiter's marriage to Lord Curzon is often cited as a happier example. Mary, a genteel and well-educated Chicago heiress, married George Curzon, later Lord Curzon of Kedleston, in 1895, the very same year as Consuelo's fateful wedding. Curzon, an ambitious statesman, deeply loved Mary and valued her counsel. When he was appointed Viceroy of India in 1899, Mary became Vicereine, the highest official rank ever attained by an American woman in the British Empire. In splendid ceremonies at the Delhi Durbar, this daughter of the New World outshone Maharanis and princesses, draped in jewels as she accompanied her husband, and importantly, she did so with enthusiasm and affection. By all accounts, Lord and Lady Curzon shared a close and happy bond. Mary's untimely death in 1906, due to complications from childbirth, devastated Curzon, who mourned her deeply. Their story was so exceptional that it inspired the fictional marriage of Cora and Lord Grantham in Downton Abbey, a rare instance of an American heiress and her British lord living happily ever after on screen. In reality, Mary Leiter was one of the few dollar princesses who found both love and status across the Atlantic. Another American woman who made an enduring mark in Britain, albeit by a slightly different route, was Nancy Langhorne Astor. Nancy was not an heiress of the same industrial scale as Consuelo or Mary. She hailed from Virginia's landed gentry, a Southern belle with wit and charm. In 1906, She married Waldorf Astor, the Anglo-American son of the influential Astor family. Waldorf Astor had been born in the United States but raised partly in England after his father, William Waldorf Astor, famously moved the family to Britain, renounced vulgar American life, and eventually accepted a peerage as Viscount Astor. When Waldorf Astor inherited that title, Nancy Astor became Lady Astor, chatelaine of the Grand Clevedon estate, and she wasted no time stepping into public life. In 1919, Nancy Astor won a seat in Parliament, becoming the first woman to take her seat in the British House of Commons. The very idea would have stunned earlier generations. An American-born woman as a member of Parliament, influencing the governance of Britain. Lady Astor's accomplishment underscored how far the transatlantic intermingling had gone. An American dollar princess, as some called her, though Nancy was modest about her wealth, was now literally writing laws for the king's realm. Her success in politics showed that these marriages could have consequences far beyond the ballroom. They could shape social progress and policy. It also symbolized the full acceptance of American women in British high society. By the 1920s, a once scandalous Yankee interloper could be celebrated as an indispensable leader, a startling evolution from the days when Jennie Jerome's pedigree was questioned. Behind the glamour and headlines, the social dynamics of these marriages were complex. Often, the American brides had to adapt to a world far more rigid and hierarchical than the one they left. Many were surprised to find that marrying a lord was not a ticket to idle luxury, but to a demanding new job. Suddenly, they were mistresses of drafty medieval manners, expected to manage large domestic staffs and navigate intricate protocols of precedence and etiquette. Their American candor and informality sometimes clashed with British reserve. Some English in-laws were openly hostile, viewing the young women as uncouth outsiders. The press coined biting phrases like gilded prostitution to suggest that these unions were essentially financial transactions. Satirical cartoons in London newspapers depicted gold coins raining down on grinning British nobles at the altar, or portrayed American brides as barges laden with dollar sacks sailing into British ports. The aristocracy, when feeling snide, mocked the dollar princesses for their accents, their brash confidence, or their father's uncultured origins. In turn, Americans bristled at the condescension. After all, it was their money propping up some of those very same noses. The brides often found solace among each other, American duchesses and countesses forming a kind of sorority abroad. They might joke privately about the absurdities of British life, the silly costumes at court presentations, or the lack of modern plumbing, but they strove to fulfill their roles. And fulfill them many did. These women were not shrinking violets. They proved to be resourceful and resilient. They took their enormous fortunes and poured money into restoring Britain's treasures. American dollars patched leaking roofs and replanted gardens at places like Blenheim Palace, helmed by Consuelo Vanderbilt, or at Rotham Park, saved by another heiress's wealth. They installed electricity, modern bathrooms, and telephones in houses that had barely changed since the 18th century. Some became famed hostesses, rejuvenating social circles with American-style hospitality and verve. They also wielded soft power. A few used their wealth to boost their husbands' political careers. For instance, Mary Leiter's money significantly aided George Curzon's ascent to the very top of imperial administration as viceroy. In country villages, the new American chatelaines could be quite popular, bringing charitable energy and sometimes more egalitarian attitudes. Lady Randolph Churchill, Jennie Jerome, organized hospital ships for British forces and wrote for magazines. Consuelo Vanderbilt, after escaping her unhappy marriage, became a philanthropist and advocate for social causes in Britain and France. These women were not mere decorative imports. Many proved to be agents of change in their adopted homeland. Yet personal contentment often eluded them. For all the grand titles and castles, loneliness and culture shock were common. One American duchess famously wrote that English country life was perfect if you are a pheasant or a Labrador retriever. For a young woman used to the liveliness of New York or Newport, rural isolation and endless protocol could be stifling. Consuelo Vanderbilt's experience was extreme but not unique. Others, too, found themselves in marriages that devolved into estrangement, infidelity, or quiet despair. Frances Ellen Work, a New York heiress, married the Irish-born Viscount, later Baron, Fermoy in 1880. She endured years of unhappiness as her husband drank and gambled through her dowry. Finally, in 1899, her disgusted father, Frank Work, agreed to pay off the Baron's debts on one condition: that his daughter be granted a divorce and full custody of the children. Frank Work was so embittered by the episode that he reportedly put a clause in his will forbidding any of his descendants from ever marrying foreigners. The irony, of course, is that life has its twists. Francis Work's grandson broke that rule, returning to Britain and eventually fathering a daughter named Frances Roche, who in turn became the mother of Lady Diana Spencer. Thus, Frank Work's great-granddaughter Diana would become none other than the Princess of Wales, the future Queen Elizabeth II's daughter-in-law. In a delicious historical twist, the same American heiress saga that Frank Work so despised ended up placing his bloodline into the heart of the British royal family. History has a sense of humor. Indeed, the legacy of the Dollar Princess era reaches right into the present British monarchy. Diana, Princess of Wales, and by extension her sons Prince William and Prince Harry, carry the genes of Francis Work, the American who tried and failed to find happiness as Lady Fermoy. Winston Churchill, as mentioned, owed his existence to Jennie Jerome's American grit. Even the late Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, had an American-born step-grandmother. In countless family trees of Europe's nobility, from the Dukes of Marlborough to the Princes of Monaco, one finds a 19th century American heiress perched on a branch, often identifiable by her unapologetically bold Gilded Age name. There is literally a princess named Consuelo in many European aristocratic lineages thanks to Consuelo Vanderbilt's influence. What started as individual marital alliances gradually became a quiet blending of bloodlines and cultures. Victorian Britons fretted that these American brides would introduce alien ways. In truth, they did, and Britain was arguably richer for it, not just in money, but in perspective. By the early 20th century, the transatlantic marriage market began to wane. Several factors contributed. For one, the social barrier in America between old money and new money started eroding. As the 20th century economy came to be dominated by self-made magnates, even Mrs. Astor's fabled 400, the exclusive list of New York's high society, had to bow to reality. They could no longer permanently shut out the nouveau riches who now owned America's railroads, banks, and industries. Once the Rockefellers and Morgans became society's leaders, marrying a duke became less of an absolute necessity for social validation. In short, money itself became the ultimate pedigree, whether old or new. As one historian put it, the old money people really couldn't hold out forever. Snobbishness about old versus new just melded into money. Period. At the same time, Britain's need for American funds diminished somewhat as the very wealthy pool of dollar princesses dried up and as other sources of wealth emerged. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 also changed everything. Many of the young aristocratic men who would have been suitors died in the trenches of Flanders, and the tone of society turned somber and nationalistic. Gallivanting after American brides in gilded ballrooms felt obsolete in a new era of sacrifice and social leveling brought on by the war. By the 1920s and 30s, the idea of marrying purely for a title had come to seem a bit passé even to Americans, who, in the booming 1920s, were perhaps more proud of being democratic and homegrown. The famous Wallace-Simpson scandal of the 1930s, when King Edward VIII abdicated to marry an American divorcee, was a very different story. more about love and royal duty than a financial transaction. The age of the dollar princesses, in the classic sense, had passed. Yet what a remarkable age it was. In the span of a few decades, these marriages reshaped the fortunes of families and even nations. Infusions of American capital allowed crumbling British country houses to be preserved. Many that tourists still visit today might not be standing were it not for a dollar princess's dowry. The social season in London gained a cosmopolitan flair, with American accents and energy spicing up stuffy drawing rooms. Anglo-American relations, often strained in the 19th century, were undoubtedly warmed by the countless personal bonds formed. It's harder to sneer at Yankees in general when one's own daughter-in-law is from Boston or New York. The aristocrats, for all their initial resistance, came to value, or at least tolerate, the blunt pragmatism and entrepreneurial spirit their American brides brought. And the American women, for their part, learned about endurance, tradition, and the weight of history from their ancient new families. The long-term legacy is also cultural. The dollar princess phenomenon has been immortalized in literature and film, captivating imaginations on both sides of the ocean. Edith Wharton tried to pen it in her unfinished novel The Buccaneers, and more recently, Julian Fellowes made it a centerpiece of television dramas. Downton Abbey's fictional Cora Crawley is a dollar princess, as is Gladys in The Gilded Age. These stories resonate because they hold a mirror to an eternal truth: the dance between wealth and status. They are tales of bargains struck in ballrooms, of youthful hopes and hard realities, of old dynasties adapting to new money. They feel inherently cinematic. One can easily picture the sweeping shot of a grand mansion saved from auction by an American heiress's fortune, or a young woman standing on the deck of an ocean liner, watching the Statue of Liberty recede as she sails off to a gilded cage in an English shire. In the end, the dynasty that bought a kingdom is not a single family, but rather this dynasty of dollar brides. Dozens of interlinked American families whose wealth flowed overseas and, in a sense, purchased a piece of Europe's heritage. They didn't literally buy a kingdom, of course, but they did buoy up the House of Lords and several royal houses with their dollars. And in time, their descendants sat on thrones and in seats of power. The Britain of today still bears their imprint, from the glittering tiaras worn at state banquets, many originally dowry gifts from American fathers, to the very lineage of the future king. It's a reminder that history often turns on unlikely alliances. Who could have imagined, in 1800s America with its prideful Republican spirit, that by 1900, wealthy American heiresses would be swapping vows with Europe's nobility as a matter of course? The spectacle of it may have raised eyebrows and inspired lampoons, but it was grounded in sober reality, mutual benefit. Each side gave and received. Titles for cash, castles for companies, old names for new money. As the camera of history pulls back, we see the broader sweep. Gilded Age America, brash and burgeoning, reaching out to Victorian Europe, venerable but vulnerable. In that union of necessity was a certain poetry. These marriages, transactional though many were, symbolized the merging of two worlds. They closed a long circle of history. The descendants of democratic revolutionaries, for many American fathers, like the Vanderbilts, were but a generation or two removed from humble roots, entering the bastions of the very aristocracy their forefathers had shed. The cultural exchange flowed both ways. America gained a measure of Old World cachet and tradition. Europe gained a lifeline of New World vitality and wealth. Looking back now, one cannot help but marvel at the individuals within this grand story. The steel-willed mothers brokeraging futures in drawing rooms, the nervous heiresses crossing the ocean in couture gowns, the titled gentlemen scanning titled Americans as if perusing investment prospectuses. We've met a few: Jennie Jerome, the Quicksilver beauty who gave Britain a Churchill; Consuelo Vanderbilt, the reluctant duchess whose fortune saved a palace; Mary Leiter, who found love and became a vicereine; Nancy Astor, who traded Virginia plantations for English manors and ended up making laws in Westminster. Their experiences ran the gamut from triumph to tragedy. Collectively, they proved that money and pedigree, two great forces of society, could combine in dramatic ways. Perhaps fittingly, Consuelo Vanderbilt herself provided a coda to this saga. After her divorce, she eventually remarried for love, a French aviator, and lived out her days in friendly exile, far from Blenheim's chill. Yet when Consuelo died in 1964, at age 87, she made a final, poignant request: to be laid to rest at Blenheim Palace, the site of her youthful sacrifice. Her ashes were indeed interred in a quiet Oxfordshire churchyard alongside past Dukes of Marlborough. It's as if, despite everything, a part of her had embraced the destiny her mother imposed. The American girl who unwillingly bought her duchess's crown chose to sleep eternally on English soil. In that gesture lies the bittersweet legacy of the dollar princesses. They became a part of the very kingdoms they had invaded with their wealth. From the sweeping verandas of Newport to the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace, the story of when American money invaded European nobility is one of high drama and enduring influence. It is a chapter in history where railroad fortunes and ancestral titles intertwined to reshape both continents' social landscapes. The Dollar Princess era reminds us that history is not just driven by battles and politics, but also by marriages and dowries, by the grand hopes of families and the private hearts of young brides and grooms. The dynasty that bought its way into a kingdom did not conquer by sword or treaty, but by the almighty dollar and the marriage certificate. In doing so, it left an indelible imprint on the aristocracy of Europe, one that proved how even the most tradition-bound institutions can be transformed when new wealth knocks at the door. The echoes of that transformation still linger in manor houses and royal family trees today, a testament to an age when money and marriage crossed the sea, and neither the old world nor the new ever looked quite the same again.